Okay guys, today I want to talk about the health of the Yu-Gi-Oh! TCG in the context of the current Banlist season discussions. If you are not new to my channel, you'll already know that I tend to stay away from content I find derivative or that exists all over YouTube, like combos and spreadsheets, etc. But I've been getting more comments telling me that I should expand the scope of my content. So, let's see if there's anything insightful I can add here. First of all, there are two things to note with how I am designing this Banlist discussion. The first is, if this were actually up to me, this would be a completely different video / Banlist, and there would be zero lingering effects or floodgates, period, but that would require a huge restructuring of the allowed pool in Yu-Gi-Oh! So instead, I want to talk about what is actually realistic and what Konami could do that would be great decisions, and also I think they actually may do. And secondly, I want to focus on current non-engine as well as the current meta decks. And of course, Justice Hunters is right around the corner, so this is really going to be the ban list for Justice Hunter season, not just right now in Duelist Advance. Okay, so let's get started with the Charmies and Droll first of all. So these are basically the cards that are in every single meta non-engine, and usually people have one of two extremely polarized opinions on these cards. Either it is, these are lingering effects / floodgates, and they're so powerful and toxic they should not be in Yu-Gi-Oh! Period. Or it's, yes, these cards are toxic, but power creep in Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a thing, and so we need toxic cards like that to hold it at bay. I personally don't think these cards should exist or be designed in this way to begin with, and I think that the Justice Hunters direction of having more interactivity in cards like Izuna and Faimina, which are actually pretty fair and not even very high ceiling types of interactions, I think that's a much better direction to go in, but I don't think it's realistic to think that Konami is going to change their current kind of like half approach of having these toxic cards to hold back power level and then just a few other cards that are going in the right direction. So I think these cards are here to stay. I accidentally have Droll in here. I guess that's because if I could ban it twice, I definitely would. But anyhow, that's going to go in the staying at 3 section for all these non-engine cards, unfortunately. Now let's talk about some of the current meta decks. If you do not follow the OCG, you may not know that Link Decoder is still legal in the OCG for Malice, and so Malice is basically full power. Dormouse is at 1, and I don't think there actually are other hits to the deck there. So Malice, before this was banned in the TCG, could play around almost any hand trap because this allowed you to get an extra body for free, so it was more efficient in card economy, required less extension from your hand because you could go into this card. It provided an extra body for free. It would be an extra deck Cyberse monster, which would be very relevant in the context of backup at Ignister or Wizard at Ignister. It also allowed for chain blocking, and generally speaking, it was easier to get to a Link 3 before Nib, and there was no downside really to playing around lots of different things. It made cards like SP a lot better because you could go into SP sooner and, you know, banish your Red Ransom or whatever. There are like lots of plays that went off of this card, and because we don't have this in the TCG, this deck is fundamentally weaker. Now in the OCG, which is basically full power Malice, because Dormouse at 1 doesn't really matter, the consistency isn't much lower, really, and they have all of the actual power cards. The deck isn't doing that much. You have Vanquish Soul K9 as by far the best deck, and somehow Yummy is standing against the darkness. So everything else is just fighting for a spot beneath that, and I do not think that in the TCG where Malice is substantially weaker without Link Decoder, this deck needs any further hits. So the current semi-limit on White Rabbit, Dormouse, Malice, and Underground, I think that they're probably not going to put these back at 3 because they're not going to do that to an already good deck when they're about to try to sell new sets. And similarly, I don't think their cards like Splash Mage that other people are saying should be hit for the same reason. If it's not even doing that much in the OCG and it's better in the OCG, then there's no reason to hit this deck. So now let's talk a little bit about Mitsurugi. I think the one thing that most people can agree on is that the King of the Feral Imps is what allows Ryziel and Mitsurugi to be one deck, because this is the bridge between the two engines. If this card did not exist, technically no one is stopping you from playing Ryziel and Mitsurugi together, but you just be hoping to draw multiple cards from different engines. It doesn't actually work together. It's not really synergistic in any sense. So if this card were banned, I think it would go a huge way to making people forced to play Mitsurugi in actual Mitsurugi decks and not use extremely strong other types of cards that are really good at baiting interactions and soaking stuff into your opponent's board or playing through hand traps, and then still have, you know, something like Habakiri in hand. But I also don't think that cards like Habakiri should be touched, because consistency hits make Yu-Gi-Oh more of a dice roll. Like, people don't like things like the maxi minigame in principle, because you don't want to, be maxied and then you're like, okay, do I have Call By or Ash in hand? No? Okay, I lost the game. And the same thing applies to strong engine cards. Imagine that King of the Feral Imps is banned, so we're actually thinking about the context of our own list, which not everyone on YouTube does, and there's no Raziel Mitsurugi anymore, in the sense that they don't bridge together. Do you actually want to make Mitsurugi worse? Or do you want to see how well it does right before Justice Hunters comes out and probably also power creeps this deck? So I feel like these types of cards should not be limited, but there are other ways to limit how annoying the deck is and the ceiling of the deck. So one of those things is the Mitsurugi Ritual. It may not seem like this would do anything if you limit it, especially because there are certain decks that play the package with only one Mitsurugi Ritual to begin with. But drawing this card in combination with other cards is what allows for very strong 2-card combos that make it so that if you feel like you've hand-trapped someone in the right place, like if they go for Habakiri and they summon the Sagi, tribute Sagi, and Sagi is triggering now to summon the Mitsurugi Ritual, and you go to Ash Blossom to Sagi, but they hard drew it anyhow, now you're getting hard punished for making the correct play. So I think having this at 1, while it is technically in a way a consistency hit, it's less a consistency hit, and it's more like they have to search for it. And if you can remove this from play, like with DD Crow or whatever, then that's a pretty strong type of play. With prayers, I'm not really sure what you should do with this type of card, because I don't like consistency hits still, but this wouldn't just be a consistency hit, because sometimes you go through multiple prayers, like you've hard drawn one and you're still going to search another because you always want to have one in your hand. Having it at 1 or 2 would force them to be a little bit more conservative with their resource management. But I think that Konami maybe should be a little bit more light-handed than they often are and allow the deck to play a bit longer, because we're entering a power creep format. So maybe if you ban Feral Imps, you limit the Mitsurugi Ritual, and you semi-limit this type of card, which I think is a very Konami-esque type of hit, just leave the actual good engine cards at 3, so people playing pure Mitsurugi aren't completely shafted. Okay, so then we have a card like Closed Heaven, and I don't actually know where this is supposed to go, because in principle, I don't think that Yu-Gi-Oh! Should exist in a way where any 2 cards can become a certain engine. And I also know that there's someone from that works at Konami said something like the reason that Pendulum isn't getting super great support and becoming great again, and Electromite isn't coming back, is because all those decks basically did the same thing, and they didn't want Yu-Gi-Oh! To be where a certain mechanic, like Pendulum Summoning, was all just a soup of the same thing. And this card kind of feels like that. Like, why would you want to allow every deck to make the exact same Fiendsmith play? But at the same time, Fiendsmith is just not really good compared to the engine power of a lot of the new decks. And while I do think that a lot of decks will continue to play it, this feels like the wrong time to ban Closed Heaven. It feels like they could have done this before and it would have felt super justified, but now I don't think it's going to happen. Engraver, I don't think there's anything wrong with the Fiendsmith cards actually, and the engine is extremely fair on its own, and it promotes actually using your brain and thinking about resource management. So I think all the Fiendsmith cards are totally fine to stay. The only card I'm not sure about is Closed Heaven, just because it allows anything to bridge into it, and I don't think those cards should exist in principle, but, it's not that good right now. Ext, I think, should be banned. I don't think this card should ever have been printed. This is one of the most absurd engine cards that existed in the history of all of Yu-Gi-Oh! This card, not only can you choose between it being just engine or also non-engine with dumping stuff like Aggregator, but you can also chain block it. And now with the release of the new rank 5 Valon that is being played in some Vanquish Soul and K9 lists because you get to Book of Moon a monster, this can also dump that instead of the Aggregator, and now it can pop a face down card. So you don't just have to be locked into Aggregator targeting a face up to negate, you also have another option. So Ect is actually getting better with the release of Valon. And I don't think this card should exist. I also do not like lists that are suggesting putting this and other names to 1, because it's making it so that Raziel becomes even more of a coin flip type deck, or it only exists because decks that can make 2 level 4s can go into Dual Drive and search the Raziel cards, in which case it's similar to the Closed Heaven situation, and I don't understand why we're allowing so many decks to go into generically strong engines. However, I do think that you could put all of the other Raziel main deck names back at 3 if X was banned, partly because you would be regaining a lost name after banning X, but also because these cards aren't actually that broken without X. if you're summoning these types of cards, the lock I feel like matters a little bit more. I think Detonator can stay at where it's at, also because Konami is very unlikely to give back power in this case. But I really do feel like an X ban would allow you to put, like Sword and Ice back at 3. Now, Exciton, I'm also not sure about this card because this one, if Closed Heaven was banned, would allow a deck like Ryzeal, Dododo, Ryzeal, or whatever to go into this type of card, and I think that could be kind of cool. Like, if you made the actual Ryzeal cards, Ryzeal deck worse by banning something like Ext, but leaving it with Exciton, it would give them some very strong power plays, and also a way to go into the Fiendsmith engine, and then Ryzeal Fiendsmith would actually be a cool deck, because it was specifically Ryzeal that could go into Fiendsmith, not just with Closed Heaven. So I'm not sure about this card. But I feel like depending on what else they do, then they could also just leave this card here. Okay, so before we get to some of the broken stuff and some of the less certain stuff, let's talk about Mermail real quick. So I don't think that cards like Minstrel and Moulin Glacier should exist either. I think these cards are fundamentally unfair. Minstrel allowing you to do as your first action looking into your opponent's hand and counter whatever possible non-engine they had. I don't think this should be in Yu-Gi-Oh! However, if you ban these types of cards, I think that a deck like Mermail is going to be fundamentally worse. Like Barrier Statue, every Barrier Statue should be banned. And there's no real reason not to ban them because they're just waiting for a deck to come out that can abuse them. And even if there isn't a deck that can abuse them, do you still want to lose to a Floodgate like this? Like, these cards shouldn't exist. But I think that Mermail would not be very good if these cards were banned, so I don't think that this is going to happen. And I feel like maybe you could ban the Floodgate and ban the card that stops counterplay and allow them to keep the Moulin Glacier. I think that's probably like a fairer type of trade-off, even though I think Moulin Glacier is also kind of unfair. Okay, so then we have basically a bunch of other cards that are Floodgates and Talents and Thrust. So let's talk about Talents and Thrust first. These cards, I think, are going to be extremely popular in the Justice Hunters format and may even start being popular in Duad format because of Vanquish Soul. When decks are starting to make turn 0 plays and most people you face at major events, especially in higher rounds, are going to have access to turn 0 plays, these types of cards become much more reliable in the main deck. And while Talents is already at 1, I don't think they're likely to change it, I also don't think they should hit Thrust, because Thrust is what gives you an actual toolbox of counter plays to turn 0 type cards. So if you think that turn 0 stuff isn't fair, then you should want these types of counterplay. And if you think turn 0 is fair, then you probably agree that interactivity is also a good thing in general, and you probably are also in favor of things like Talents at 1 and also Thrust at 3 to be legal. But because Thrust is probably going to be extremely common in the main deck, or at least in the side deck, there are lots of other types of targets that are probably going to be popular as well. I think I forgot to put Dimensional... Oh no, I did put Dimensional Barrier in here. These types of cards I also don't think should exist. These are lingering Floodgates, and they're not healthy for the game. So Different Dimension, Ground, and D-Barrier I don't think should exist. Featherstorm should not exist. This is probably one of the least winnable games, is when someone activates Featherstorm on you and there's nothing you can do, and as long as they can make Castel with 2 level 4s, then Thrust makes this card live, so I think that should definitely be banned as well. Mistaken Arrest is a card that is another Floodgate that's actually stronger than Droll, and in the decks that can play it, like debatably Malice, this is going to feel extremely oppressive, and I don't think that you should be able to be Drolled for 2 turns in a row, even though one of them isn't your own turn, because you have absolutely no chance to come back from that. And you don't even get the first search like you would with Droll. The only downside to this card is that it is a quick play spell, which means that you cannot do it on turn 0, but still, I don't think there should be more coin flip type Floodgates in the game, so I think that should also be banned. Then we have Paradise Smasher. I don't think anyone thinks this card should be in the game. Like, it's just another Featherstorm, basically. Then we have Protoss and Eschatos. These are cards that are basically just waiting for someone to abuse them, and so I also don't think they should exist in Yu-Gi-Oh! Even if they're not doing something right now, I think there's always a chance for them to be abused, especially because with just Infernal Flame Banshee, you can go into, the flag and all that type of stuff. So yeah, then the last card on here is Original Sinful Spoils. I think that Konami probably will not bring this back, but when Snake Eyes was hit and this card was banned, it was a very strange type of hit because not only did it destroy all other fire decks realistically, it also hurt Snake Eyes, which would have a bad matchup into both Malice and Ryzeal, which were the 2 decks that were coming out. And so those decks were both power creeping Snake Eyes and also would have won the matchup into Snake Eyes. So I felt like this was a very weird ban when this would have allowed White Forest Snake Eyes to be a very cool lore deck. Like, probably the best lore deck, at least that I can remember outside of branded, I guess. So maybe there's a possibility that this card comes back to 1, and maybe they'll hit some other type of name, but they have been bringing back, you know, like Poplar and Bonfire, so who knows? I think there's a possibility this card comes back. So that's basically my opinion on the cards that are most likely to be touched or not on the ban list. If you have any other suggestions, let me know, or you think that there's a different type of reasoning that should be applied to Konami ban list, I'd be curious to hear what your thoughts are. If you want to join the Discord, the link will be in the description below, and I'll be back to my regular content shortly. Thanks for watching.